All right, hey guys, this is the first mid 9 week study guide for our Tennessee history course. The first question is, how did the name Tennessee originate? Well, it originated from an American Indian word, Tanotsi. So that's the Yuchi tribe is where that came from. It refers to where the rivers come together. In class, we talked about how it was spelled many different ways. It's kind of like our names when you say a name and it's spelled different, and eventually it kind of whittles its way down from you see the Tonic, the Tennessee, and then it came to Tanotsi, and then eventually in 1750s it was written down by the South Carolina governor, and it became Tennessee. So during this time, the cultures that inhabited the major regions, now these were periods, these were like time periods that this type of Indian lived. The first is Paleo. That means nomads. Paleo means ancient, excuse me. They were nomads. They moved around and they followed their food. So they had mastodons and saber-toothed tigers and things like that. Then you have the Khotan site is where they found mastodon bones along with stone tools. This site proved that Paleo Indians lived in Tennessee. The next, you have the Archaic. They are hunter-gatherers, which means they hunted food, but they also gathered berries and twigs and stuff. They lived in rock shelters. They were the first group to stay in one place. They created stone spears, and they created the earliest forms of pottery. The next group is the Woodland. They lived near forests, lakes, and rivers. They were also hunter-gatherers, and they farmed. This group is the one that used bows and arrows. They created pottery with designs. The pins and mounds used for burial and ceremonies, and the old stone fort, which was used for ceremonies, were built during this time period. Pins and mounds and old stone forts showed complex societies lived in Tennessee. The next group, the final group or time period, is the Mississippian. They lived in the Mississippi River Valley. That's where they get their name. They were mound builders as well, like the Woodland Indians, and they made weapons. They had pottery and jewelry. They were hunter-gatherers and farmers. Chicalisa Indian Village, this was the best preserved prehistoric Indian settlement in Tennessee. So what were the various customs and traditions of the pre-colonial American Indian tribes? So the first, we have the Cherokee. The Cherokee was the largest group that it lived in southeast United States. The men hunted and traded. The women planted, gathered, and took care of children. And in this society, women were equal to men. Then you had the principal chief and the beloved woman. Nancy Ward was one of the beloved women of the Cherokee. They were the leaders of the Cherokee, and they had special privileges and powers and responsibilities. They both had, the Cherokee had summer and winter homes. Remember, the summer homes were larger. They were more airy to allow the wind to come through. That way it'd be cooler. The winter homes were smaller. Not only were they smaller, they had a hole up top where you could light a fire inside and the smoke would go out. The next group is the Chickasaw. The Chickasaw lived along rivers in Tennessee, Alabama, Mississippi, and Kentucky. They had a chief and a village council. They were very warlike. They raised sons to be brave fighters. You couldn't complain or show pain if you were a Chickasaw male. Creeks, they lived in the southeast, Chattanooga, Tennessee specifically, and then Alabama and Georgia. They hunted and farmed. They built villages around plaza for games and ceremonies, and their biggest enemy was the Cherokee. The final group is the Shawnee. They were nomads. They lived in wigwams. Their primary village was in Nashville, and they were one of the first groups to trade with Europeans. So that's the prehistoric and pre-colonial people living in Tennessee. Now we're going to move into the European individuals and the colonial people moving into Tennessee. So how did the Cumberland Gap influence migration to Tennessee? Well, the Proclamation of 1763 was a law by King George, and this law said that nobody could settle west or to the left, if you're looking at a map, of the Appalachian Mountains. That was reserved for Indians. It was designed so that the Indians and the settlers would not fight with each other as much. It stopped the colonists from settling there, and the settlers really didn't like the fact that a king thousands of miles, an entire ocean away, was telling them, this is what you need to do. So they pretty much disregarded, didn't even listen to him. Now, the Cumberland Gap was a shortcut through the Appalachian Mountains where Virginia, Tennessee, and Kentucky meet. This shortcut was an invitation to the settlers, and it influenced people to travel to the Tennessee regions and make it their home. So how did the Wilderness Road influence migration into the Tennessee region after the proclamation? Well, this guy named Richard Henderson, which we'll talk about him here in a minute when we talk about the Cumberland settlements, he had a Transylvania land company, and he actually paid Daniel Boone to cut down all the trees and make the Wilderness Road. So Daniel Boone's going to carve a road through the Cumberland Gap by cutting down trees and making a road. The settlers sent goods back east, and the road became important for trade because people would move over the Appalachian Mountains using the Cumberland Gap and the Wilderness Road, and they would send goods and trades, animal skins, that kind of thing back. All right, now the first permanent settlement happened, and it was the Watauga settlement. William Bean was the first settler, but the four individuals that are important about the Watauga settlement, the first one is Dragging Canoe. He was the son of Little Carpenter out of Kula Kula. He did not like the Cherokee selling land to the Wataugans. This was called the Watauga Purchase. He disagreed with his father's treaties, and he allied himself with the British to attack Fort Watauga. John Sevier was the father of Tennessee, and he built Fort Watauga, and he led attacks against the Cherokee at Chattanooga, and he defended Fort Watauga. Nancy Ward was Nanyehi. She was a member of the Wolf Clan of the Cherokee tribe. Her husband had died, and when her husband died, she actually took his place during the battle, and because of how fierce she fought, she was given the title of Beloved Woman. She became a peacemaker between the Cherokee and the settlers, and she warned the settlers of the Indian attacks. The final thing is the Watauga Compact. So the people that started settling the Watauga settlement came in, and they had no set of laws. They were now officially outside the land owned by and ruled by Britain. So they had to come up with a new set of laws. This new set of laws was called the Watauga Compact. It was a set of laws, and it said they were free of British rule, and was the first attempt in the United States of people self-governing themselves outside of Britain. All right, the next settlement we're going to talk about is the Cumberland settlements. All right, Richard Henderson, we told you we'd talk about him later, from the Transylvania Land Company, sent James Robertson and John Donaldson to settle the region. John Donaldson led a group along a water route in 30 flatboats. These were huge boats. They were hard to turn. There was no motors back then, so they had these huge sticks that they tried to turn and a rudder to turn the boat and a rudder to use, and it was very difficult. They left in the middle of February. The journey was very deadly and dangerous. I think one of our readings even talked about how a baby fell over and drowned. The water was rough and the boats were hard to steer. You can imagine a boat going down a river, and the Native Americans, the boats weren't going that fast. They were hard to steer. The Native Americans had easy shots at them from the banks. Now, James Robertson, however, led a group over land. He left a lot earlier than John Donaldson and his group. They rode horses, they walked, and they drove livestock. So they went from the Cumberland Gap down the Wilderness Road into Kentucky, and then eventually into what is now Nashville. They had a lot easier journey. They built Fort Nashboro, and that's where we get Nashville today. So some of the obstacles they established, one of the big things they had trouble with was, just like the Watauga, they had no set of laws. They were outside the British rule. So they came up with the Cumberland Compact, which was very similar to the Watauga Compact. They faced harsh winters. Y'all know what winter is like in Tennessee. It's difficult. They had frequent Native American attacks. One of those Native American attacks was the Battle of the Bluffs. If you can remember, we talked about in class, in the Battle of the Bluffs, some Indians were going to attack Fort Nashboro. And at Fort Nashboro, James Robertson's wife, Charlotte, was outside the fort, heard them. She would set loose the dogs that were trained to attack the Indians. They attacked the Indians, allowed the people outside the fort to come back in and save them. So this was a guy that led the attack at the Battle of the Bluffs on Fort Nashboro was Dragging Canoe. So we see him once again messing with the settlements because he doesn't like the white people, the colonists and settlers inside of Tennessee. So he's still giving them problems. The next thing we talked about was how Tennesseans played a part in the American Revolution. So how were the Tennesseans, the Over-Mountain men, important in the Battle of Kings Mountain during the American Revolution? Well, Kings Mountain is unique in Americans' history. This battle was fought by 1,000-plus militiamen. Now remember, these militiamen were not everyday soldiers. They were farmers, they were businessmen, they were blacksmiths, they were shoemakers. They had no orders. They had heard that Patrick Ferguson was going to come and going to attack them, and nobody could move him from this mountain except God, and he was going to lay waste to all of their land with sword and fire. And so without orders, without formal military training, They had no uniforms. They wore their hunting clothes, and they knew they didn't. No way they knew they were going to get paid. They came and attacked Colonel Patrick Ferguson on Kings Mountain. They fought Indian style, guerrilla style, which means they hid behind trees and rocks and in ditches. They didn't form in lines like the British did. They had better weapons. The British had smooth bore, which means the barrels were very smooth, and it's like shooting a spitball. You never know where it's going to go. The Over Mountain men had rifling, which means when their bullets came out of their gun, they were spinning like a football, a tight spiral, like a quarterback throwing a spiral, and they were very accurate. They cut off all the exits to them, climbed up at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. They had marched from Tennessee through North Carolina into South Carolina and at Kings Mountain. And at 3 o'clock on October 7, 1780, they attacked. Within an hour, almost 200 British were dead and 800 were captured. So what this does is that we believe that it changed the course of the Revolution. It may even ensure that the original number of colonies in the United States would be 13 and not 10. If they had won this battle, it's pretty certain that North Carolina, South Carolina, and Georgia might have been kept in British hands, and so that helped. It also encouraged the Americans because, hey, we beat this huge British force, and it discouraged the British. One of the main people that's famous in Tennessee and important in Tennessee, John Sevier. You got Sevierville in Sevier County. He actually was one of the leaders of the Over Mountain Men, and there was a large number of soldiers from what is present-day Tennessee, and this is going to help when we get to the Mexican-American War and we talk about volunteers. It's going to help give us the name of our state, or nickname of our state, the Volunteer State. All right, that's the quick overview of the first mid-9 weeks test. Is a lot. Make sure you study tonight. It's Wednesday. It's the 28th. It's 11:45 right now. So once this gets out there, you need to study Wednesday night and you need to study Thursday night. Remember what I said about your reward. The first thing, your parents have to sign a note saying you studied both Wednesday night and Thursday night. Then you have to work hard the entire time on Friday on your test. And then the third thing is you have to make sure, since this is our very first one, you don't have your individual goals. You just got to pass. You've got to make a score of 70 or higher. If you do those things, you'll get a reward, and I'll let you know what it is Monday. As always, if you have questions, comment on this video. Have your parents message me or remind or ask me at school tomorrow.